What's up guys, Asian here with the PTS patch notes review for patch 6.1.1. So yes, I am back in my apartment in Wisconsin for the next week. So I will have access to my desktop obviously during that time, and then I will be moving back down to Texas but sometime towards the end of next week. So hopefully I'll be able to reset up this configuration in Texas, but no promises on that, so don't get used to the return to quality just yet. But surprisingly, in 6.1.1, this is week 2 of the PTS, there are actually a couple of fixes and changes here that are relatively significant. I say relatively because it doesn't really change the ultimate calculus, but there are some pretty interesting changes that came into effect during this week. So the ones that we're going to be taking a look at obviously are going to be here under gameplay and combat, but I do include, as usual, the full patch notes in the description below for those guys who want to peruse the full patch notes. So Coagulating Blood received a small buff, so this is the Dragon Blood morph that most people don't typically use. Typically speaking, you'll be using Green Dragon Blood because you're usually going to be using this as a tank. DK, DPS, you don't really need this sort of heal that much, and for tanks, Coagulating Dragon Blood is actually on the weaker side compared to Green Dragon Blood instead. But Coagulating Dragon Blood did see a buff here, but again, it's not really something you're going to be seeing used very often for both Magicka and Stamina DKs. They fixed a issue with the Pestilent Colossus morph, and they did fix how werewolf transformations, well, I should say, they generate a proper error message now when you try to write a group mount in werewolf transformation, but there were a couple of changes to a couple of sets that sort of kind of shifted the meta a little bit here. I shouldn't say shift the meta, kind of changed things up a little bit. So the first is the nerf to New Moon Acolyte. They reduced the weapon and spell damage granted from the 5-piece down to 401 instead of 481. So this is about a 16% nerf, so it's an absolute drop of 80 weapon and spell damage. So this is a nerf to New Moon Acolyte, and at this point here, I'm not 100% certain whether it'll still be useful to run New Moon Acolyte. To be sure, the 401 weapon and spell damage is still by far the largest static bonus you can get for weapon and spell damage out of any set, particularly crafted sets here. So it is still fairly strong, but there might be other sets here that would be able to match the strength of New Moon Acolyte. That being said, New Moon Acolyte is still a very powerful crafted set despite this nerf, so I still think it has its place in the endgame PvE environment, but it is definitely going to be a small nerf. And they did fix the Torag's Pact enchantment potency down to the intended 45%. The next one's Elemental Precision. We're assuming this is a typo and they actually mean Elemental Catalyst instead. They reduced the bonus critical damage taken from this set stack to 5% down from 6%. So instead of the 18% at 3 max stacks, now it's only going to be 15%. This does change the math a little bit, but it's still a very powerful buff, so you would still want to be running Elemental Catalyst on a Magicka Necromancer, for example, or even a healer. Then we have Spell Power Cure, where they reduced the duration of the Major Courage granted to 5 seconds down from 10 seconds. Now, with this change, this actually doesn't change a lot of things with Spell Power Cure. The big thing here is, you typically speaking will be using a heal over time ability like Blood Altar or Energy Orb to proc Spell Power Cure, and reducing the duration of the Major Courage buff doesn't really change things, because as a healer in PvE, typically speaking, you will have some sort of heal over time out that will be covering most, if not all, of your allies. Something like a Healing Springs, for example, or again, Blood Altar with a minor lifesteal, or something along those lines. So while this is on paper it is a nerf, in practice this really doesn't change too much with how Spell Power Cure operates, and I would still say that Spell Power Cure is going to be probably more flexible as a source of Major Courage than Olorime. Then they changed something with Unleashed Terror, which is not a set that's really used too often. Then we have Thrashing Stranglers, where they increase the duration of each stack to 10 minutes to make them, quote, essentially permanent, while fixing some bugs with actual permanent stacks. Now, they did give us a hint of what they're planning with Thrassian moving forward. The set is currently undergoing some additional changes which are not yet complete. We plan to increase the maximum stack count from 20 to 50, allowing the set to stack up to a maximum of 2,000 weapon and spell damage, but with a 50% reduction in healing, shield efficacy, and increased damage taken. This should make the maximum power of the set unattainable to reach by multiple players in a trials settings. At the moment, these stacks are also not being removed on death. These changes and issues will be fixed in a future PTS patch. So the stacks will be removed on death, and they are increasing the maximum number of stacks up to 50 from 20, granting you more weapon and spell damage power, but obviously with a greater nerf to your healing received, shield efficacy, and increase in damage taken. Now, whether that will result in a reduction in the power of Thrassian still remains to be seen. It is not permanent stacks. It seems like they're maintaining the 10-minute stacks. So for longer form trials, Thrassian is definitely not going to be nearly as good. Now, each stack might renew the timer, in which case you might still be able to run Thrassian throughout an entire trial. And they did say they're increasing the maximum stack count with the intention of making that maximum power of the set unattainable to reach for multiple players. That being said, you still run into the issue where you can still get the total number. Let's say a trial has 150 possible kills outside of bosses. You can still get 150 stacks, except it is now spread out across more people now and across more stacks. So I'm not sure this is really going to nerf Thrassians necessarily, these changes that they are proposing here outside of just reducing the weapon and spell damage that each stack is able to give you. And that's kind of the issue with introducing Thrassians. They introduced a very, very powerful set bonus, and they don't really have any idea how to really balance it out. Next, they increased the armor value for Meritorious Service. Ravager, they fixed an issue with Ravager. And then they changed Olorime here. So they reduced the duration of the AoE that grants Major Courage from this set to 5 seconds, down from 10 seconds. So that's the circle that is applied when you throw down Olorime. So that now lasts for 5 seconds. They increased the duration of the Major Courage granted from touching the area effect to 20 seconds instead of 10 seconds. And they say their justification for this is that it will now better reinforce the need to coordinate with your allies and quickly capitalize on the effect, better reward you for doing so. But I'm not sure this is actually what's going on here. The cooldown is still 10 seconds between procs here. So what's going to happen is you throw it in the circle, it lasts for 5 seconds, your allies will be stacked in it and they'll get the Major Courage for 20 seconds, then you have 5 seconds off, and then you have to throw down another Olorime after that 10-second cooldown for another 5 seconds. Now, granted, this is better than what Olorime was in 6.1.0, but I'm not 100% certain whether this is going to be used more often than Spell Power Cure. Now, the increase in the duration of Major Courage does make it give you a little bit more leeway now, because now you can miss a proc and still more or less have 100% uptime on Major Courage. But again, Spell Power Cure, you already have a lot of overhealing being done as is in the current healing meta. So even though the Major Courage duration from Spell Power Cure has been reduced down to 5 seconds, it's still pretty much going to have very high uptime as long as you have those overheals going from something like Blood Altar or whatever. So I'm not sure whether Olorime is going to be better used compared to Spell Power Cure. I personally still think Spell Power Cure is going to be the better option here, but it still remains to be seen. I don't really play healers and I haven't been playing the game, so I'm not 100% certain. I will need to see what other healers are saying in the various discords I'm in. And then finally, Bloodthirsty saw a buff here, so now you get up to 350 bonus weapon and spell damage instead of 250, and the trait, now they did confirm here that it does not inherit percent increases to these stats, so it doesn't buff things like brutality or sorcery, doesn't affect this increase that you get from Bloodthirsty. I will be doing a future video taking a look at how Bloodthirsty stacks up and whether Bloodthirsty or Infused is stronger. I will say right now that for those of you guys who are wondering about transmuting your Bloodthirsty jewels back to Infused, right now, it seems like Bloodthirsty is going to be stronger in most scenarios. There are probably going to be a couple of niche scenarios where Infused will be better, but again, hang on tight for that video where I'm going to be exploring Bloodthirsty versus Infused. Now, that's pretty much it for the second week of the PTS. Again, a lot of interesting changes. You don't really see that many changes until week 3, so I'm kind of anticipating week 3 to have a few more rebalances coming down the pipeline here. We already saw what they're planning to do with Thrassian, so there's probably going to be more stuff going down the pipeline in the next week's patch notes. But that is it for this video. As always, link in the description below to the full patch notes if you guys want to read the entirety of the second week patch notes. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.